Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to our GLOBETalk presentation. My name is Tanya Sadowski, and I'm one of the program coordinators at the Community Solution Education System Global Engagement Department, and I'm very, very excited to share with you today our wonderful presentation. Before I hand it over to our esteemed speaker, I just want to talk a little bit about our GLOBETalks. Give me 1 second to pull. Great. So our GLOBETalk presentation today is Innovation, Expression, and Societal Sustainability, an overview of today's South Korea. This session is brought to you by the Community Solution Global Engagement Department. The Global Engagement Department at the Community Solution Education System and our schools, we are all committed to preparing innovative, engaged, purposeful agents of change who serve our global community. Our global engagement team works to bring this mission to life by providing leadership, infrastructure, and support for internationalization throughout the community solution community. We are passionate about creating learning opportunities that have a positive impact on our global community. Our GLOBETalk series is part of our global engagement mission and provides virtual year-round discussions to introduce our community to thought leaders in higher education, experts on key functional areas, best practices, and the diversity of ideas necessary to expand our own internal strategic thinking. Before we begin today's GLOBETalk, we'd like to go over a few tips for best accessing this session. We ask that you all mute yourself during today's session, but feel free to use the chat box to enter any questions or reactions throughout. We also recommend keeping your video off in the interest of conserving bandwidth. As we all know, technology can sometimes be finicky. As the speaker's presenting, we will be monitoring the chat. We do have a lot of time at the end for Q&A, so you will have time to pose your questions to the speaker directly, but feel free again to use the chat to pose any questions or comments. As I mentioned, we do request your patience. Technology can be a challenge at times, and we will do our best. On that note, if there are any issues, this recording or this GLOBETalk is being recorded and will be available after the session on our YouTube channel. So now, without any further ado, I would like to introduce our featured speaker. Our featured speaker today is Dr. Luann Fortune. Dr. Luann Fortune is a professor in the Mind-Body Medicine PhD Mindful Leadership in Healthcare Specialization at Saybrook University's College of Integrative Medicine and Health Sciences. She has a BA in Interdisciplinary Social Sciences and an MA and PhD in Human Development. She is a former fellow at Fielding University's Institute of Social Innovation and served on the executive committees for the Interdisciplinary Coalition of North American Phenomenologists and the Society for Phenomenology and Human Sciences, and on the Program Plan Committee for Integrative Medicine for Underserved. As an educator and scholar practitioner, Dr. Fortune has been teaching, developing curriculum, and leading at Saybrook University for over 13 years. Over the years, she's become very passionate about exploring South Korea as a system, and she continues to follow this interest and is very grateful to be able to share her knowledge and insights with all of you today. Again, without further ado, I will hand it over now to Dr. Fortune. Dr. Fortune, it's all yours.
Tanya, thank you so much. I'm just so delighted to be here with everybody today for reasons that I will explain as I go through. I have a presentation for you, and I appreciate your questions if you can put them in the chat box. This is the first time I've done this presentation, so forgive me if I fumble a little bit with my timing on this. I would like to be able to get to your questions and discussion at the end, so let me go ahead and get started here. I'm going to be sharing my full screen here for reasons that become apparent later on. So to begin with, you've heard already from Tanya that we are part of the Globe Talks of 2025, and I'm going to be talking you through work that I've done around South Korea as a nation, as a culture, and as a system. You've heard enough about me, so I'm going to jump right into talking about South Korea. So first of all, we can look at South Korea from the intersections of history, technology, pop culture, which they call Hallyu, as well as their national healthcare system, which was a project that I received last year when I was honored to be invited to lead a study group to South Korea, which for many reasons that are quite understandable did not materialize. But it gave me the opportunity to do what scholars can do, which is to look at how South Korea history, culture, and the intersections of particular sectors can influence life for the individual as well as for the entire society, its sustainability, and how it can manage transitions. So, my question was, if you look at this from the perspective of a research question, how deeply intertwined science, medicine, and technology are not only to our policies, our corporations, and societies, but also to the human condition. So I did what any good scholar would do. I went to the library and I developed a conceptual framework for doing a literature review. And the sectors I looked at had to do with popular culture, technology, as well as how they fed and influenced healthcare. But what I learned in the process, and what I really want to focus on today, is how the larger milieu of history, of society, and global connections influence all those things because we are connected as a system. So, our wealth, or the wealth in this case of South Korea, the wellness of the individuals as well as the society, are all intertwined and also demonstrate different weaknesses that we can see and learn from in the case of South Korea and how it applies to different places in the world. So let us step back and take a look, first of all, at the geography and the history. So you all probably seen world maps and you know that South Korea is at the bottom of a peninsula. And through this common peninsula, they share a history with the Korean people, but also with the Chinese empires for over 3,000 years. And you might notice that through that peninsula, they are connected to the only landmass where they have direct contact. So centuries of dynasty eras right up to 1910 led up to the development of the people, the cultures, the systems, the society of Korea as a whole. They were actually a protectorate of China up until 1886 when China cut them loose. And even though their culture, their tribal backgrounds influence how they developed from China, they were largely influenced by Japan. And in particular, Japan stepped in the early part of the 1900s and occupied what was then all of Korea. Today, we have two different nations, North Korea, which we know is a totalitarian state with many economic challenges and deep ties to the Soviet Union, now Russia, and South Korea that we think of as a democracy with a strong economy. Well, how did this happen? How did it evolve? Take a look at recent history and that line that now separates the North and the South. All of Korea was colonized by Japan from 1910 to 1945, and in many ways the citizenship was minimalized. After World War II and the separation of what we know as North Korea and South Korea, we then encountered the Korean War, and that conflict actively went on for 3 years. However, technically, Korea is still at war. North Korea and South Korea are at war with each other, and they're separated by the demilitarized zone, which separates the entire peninsula. This has an influence on what goes on in both of the entities. In South Korea, there was a push through the influence of the US to develop into a republic. So starting in the 1960s, there was a beginning of a journey which manifested into 5 different republics. And bear with me because all of these things are influential. They do have to do with today's events and also with the healthcare and the wellness that we find in South Korea today. So during the 60s and 70s, there was actually martial law in South Korea and limited political freedom. martial law was not lifted until 1981. And there has been a development of different republics where the Constitution was actually completely thrown out, reinvented, put back in again, and a new regime took over. It wasn't until 1987 that South Korea actually enacted what we would look at as a democracy with a directly elected president. So the first president in South Korea that was directed by the electorate, by the citizenship, was Ru Ta-woo. Since the beginning, there have been 7 elected presidents to follow that. So there has been a large amount of turnover. There was actually a president in 2013, the first woman president, Park Geun-hye, who ended up leaving office in a bit of a scandal, was impeached, and then dismissed. So today's current event is not the first impeachment that South Korea has experienced in the last several decades. So it's only since 2022 that the Yoon autocracy and the current impeachment dismissal that we have just seen unfold in the last months have taken place. In fact, today, South Korea is still awaiting June elections to install a new democratically elected president. The point of all this is that there has been a lot of influx in South Korea over the decades that have influenced how it has developed. So in the pre-industrial drive, what does that mean? Well, up into the 1960s, South Korea was geographically isolated, had experienced a diminished amount of natural resources, and pretty severely economically disadvantaged. The total GDP then was $2.3 billion. It was an agrarian society. Most people lived out on farms. There was a very low manufacturing sector at only 15%. There was a very minimal presence of science and technology. This is only 50 years ago. There was very limited international trade. It was very isolated. And in 1962, the government, largely supported by the US, who still had some occupied presence, launched a business strategy. And that business strategy has propelled South Korea to where it is today. Well, where is it today? There was an economic development plan that invested heavily in education and human resource development, but was very specific. By intention, limited foreign investment directly, although the United States supported this plan in many ways. The South Korean government forced companies to compete in global markets through incentives, through funding, through education directives, in particular, first of all, with the textiles industry and manufacturing, then with steel and chemicals. And then in the 1980s, an important development was launched in the semiconductor and electronics business. Automobiles followed in the 1990s. 1990s, less than 30 years ago. And in the late 90s, that expanded to a whole generation of a product export and entertainment, which was accompanied by one in beauty products. Today, South Korea is the fourth largest Asian economy and has global influence. The GDP has tripled just in the last less than 25 years, and you can see it is significant. And the exports, even up till March of this year, were up 5.5%. However, today it faces, as many countries in the world do, downgraded economic expectations due to US tariffs. And as all of us on this call probably are, we are following the developments of what's going on in Asia and how what's happening here will influence South Korea being able to maintain the rapid exponential growth it's experienced in the last 50 years, as you can see from this chart. So, where does that take us with my inquiry? Education. And we're all interested in this part. First of all, where did the education plan that the development plan introduced manifest? What did it come into? Well, first of all, South Korea as a nation, as a culture, has those deep connections to Confucianism through its eras of connection with China, with the empires. And Confucianism is not a religion as much as a philosophy. I'll say something about that in a little bit. But under Japanese rule, the Korean education was minimal. So even though it was still valued by the culture, it was totally suppressed from the years of 1910 to 1945. In many cases, education was not available. It was a minimal style of education, and it really worked against the norms of the Korean culture. Post World War II, South Korea adopted a U.S. system. So the 6334 refers to 6 years of primary school, 3 years of middle school, 3 years of high school, followed by 4 years of university. This system is highly prized as a achievement within Korean culture. They spend more money than the OECD average. Their focus is on math, sciences, and languages. And the curriculum that I've looked at is very specific, focuses a lot on memorization, focuses a lot on technical learning and skill development. There's a rigorous exam system, and that exam and its outcomes dictates the future of the individuals who take it and reflects on their entire families. In the media, it's referred to as education fever. The cost of education, some of which is free, some of which is supplemented by the Korean government system, absorbs approximately 30% of family income. Families often go into debt to arrange for private tutoring, which is averaged to be 10% of a family's income, because how well students do in that initial exam determines where they will place in university, which determines where they will place for their job, which frequently is lifelong. And there is a premium put on working for the large companies. It is hyper competitive. And as a result, South Korea has the highest suicide rate in the OECD nations. They also have high outcomes. 70% of the workforce have a university degree, and the literacy rate is 98.8%. By comparison, in the US, 79% US adults are literate. And in the Korean system, the disadvantaged, those who might be in marginalized systems, get more resources in order to benefit further. Let's see. Seem to be a little stuck here on this slide. There we go. So let's take another focus. Technology. We all might know about the influence of South Korea in technology, electronics, semiconductors, and our very equipment. So the National Research and Development Program that was launched in 1982 prioritized education, but also put a lot of influence on exports that could be developed to promote South Korea's influence and its own wealth, which promoted the rise of Samsung, LG, and many other technology companies that you might recognize. They are right now a highly advanced nation from the standpoint of having their own technologies internally. All families have access to 5G. In 2019, the entire country was converted to a 5G network. So they also, as many of us might remember, led the mobile phone dominance market. And there's actually a side analysis of this that shows up in one of the course books that I use in my mindful leadership curriculum by Hogarth and Carter that talks about how Samsung lost its mobile phone dominance to iPhone, primarily in their analysis because it did not have the imagination to envision why people would want to be walking around with a little computer in their back pockets. However, They continue to move forward. Today, they've expanded to green technology, which until recently was a major new market, biotechnology, which they experimented in their own nation, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, and artificial intelligence to make them a global leader in that area, including how they have introduced it into their national healthcare system. So their innovations have expanded from technology to other industries, particularly entertainment, as well as healthcare management. And their technology product is still the largest export that South Korea sprouts. So the national healthcare system is influenced by it, but as well, they have a high standard of living, they have a high life expectancy, and they have a high average income. The average income equates in US dollars to approximately $39,000 per person in Korea, all reflections of the societal wealth that they have gained, primarily beginning with their economic development program. So this comes with a cost, which is now taking us back to my original question was, how does this influence the health and wellness of the people of South Korea and the nation? Well, in very simple physical terms, back to the geography, most people, meaning that over 50% of all of the people who live in South Korea live in Seoul. This has created the problems of being a concentrated population, along with affordable housing, along with other congestion problems, and along with the infrastructure of the family. So we are witnessing, even right now, the sunset of the extended family structure, which was actually mandated by the government under the Civil Code of 1958 to encourage nuclear family structure and greater mobility to support economic growth. So again, we have a housing shortage. We've also seen an increase of women in the workforce, although there is a very high earnings gender gap, as well as social tensions have been created out of that. One of my personal insights as I delved into trying to experience South Korea myself was reading the work of Han Kang, who I recommend The Vegetarian to you. It is the first book of hers, and you might know that she won the Nobel Prize for Literature the past year. And in it, she focuses on a woman who is basically losing her mental capacities and ability to relate to reality because of the pressures that are typical for women in South Korea. They've also experienced an incredible drop in birth rate. So in 1960, the average female had 6 births. Today, it is 0.78. So the population is shrinking. And along with that, along with many of our advanced countries, they are experiencing some issues along with the supporting populations. Lots of gender-based social tensions and adaptability issues. So education is based on developing very specific technical skills. And if educators, we expand out a little bit, then how do we understand how to transform as our society transforms? South Korea shows very low life satisfaction rates. Of the OECD countries, of 38 that they count, it ranks 33 in terms of satisfaction. This is in spite of the fact of their high societal wealth, their average income, and all of the benefits that appear to be available to those who live in South Korea. Tremendously high stress around working, around family structures with long working hours. They are finally now considering mandating a maximum number of working hours per week to be 56 hours per week. The industrial chaebols hold the power. So those would be the Samsungs, the Hyundais, the LG technology companies. And if you are not with those, you are under tremendous pressure to appear to be more achieved in society than the others. So there's a lot of social structure. Well, maybe they can fall back on their religious roots that come from eras of connecting with China. So there is a heavy influence of Buddhism, and over 20,000 temples remain throughout Korea. About 900 of those are traditional, which is a pretty substantial amount. They have used those to also advance their tourism industry. So South Korea promotes temple stays where we can pay to go to South Korea, stay in a temple for 1 to 2 nights, and have the experience of living in a Buddhist temple for a price, of course. Today, only 60% of Koreans report as non-religious. They are instead reporting as being atheist or having no religious affiliation. Of the remaining, 20% identify as Christians, 16 as Buddhists, 3 to 4 as others. But Confucian ideology remains an important part of their value system and the principles. So what are those? Loyalty and respect for authority is incredibly important. And if you think about that in terms of the governance systems that have perpetuated in South Korea, it can make sense that there have been so many regimes that were able to install martial law and to enact programs that needed to be followed by the letter by the citizenry of South Korea. The importance of education comes also from that cultural history, as well as deference to hierarchies. But globalization comes with its own prize. So, what we are seeing now is with the introduction of globalization. So, with exports also come imports. And today, South Korea, runs about par, importing in products, goods, culture at about the same rate that it's sending things out. So, what comes with that? Well, it comes with ideas. So, different ideas infiltrating culture include individual freedoms, equality across genders, individual self fulfillment rather than prioritizing the village. And this is showing up in particular amongst younger generations. And now, at that note, I would like to introduce one of the most fun parts of this inquiry. So I came into this not knowing that much about Hallyu and what K-wave meant. So I'm going to take us back to pop culture. So expression has always been a part of the traditional values. In the late 1990s, the idea that culture could become a major export became prominent. And recently, in 2022, global culture rated South Korea as seventh place in all of the global influencers as cultures and nations. This happened relatively quickly because South Korea's ability to master technology positioned them well for high levels of global distribution to become present on those very computers that they resisted. We were put into our back pockets. We are now tapping into South Korean culture on a regular basis. So Hallyu related exports reached 14.616 billion in 2023. That places them up there in the top exports of Korea, which is perpetuated globally, but particularly domestically by strong national pride and an extreme fan base. All of these aspects feed the internal tourism business, which in itself now has become a major export. I'm not sure that's going to be tariffable. And as President Park said, the one who got impeached and then dismissed the first president, culture is power. So the ability to export South Korean perspective through entertainment has had a major influence. Now, I wasn't aware personally about the amount of the influence. I took a look at some of the numbers and realized, and I want to give a shout out to my daughter, who might even be listening in, because she helped me see the number of places that influenced me on so many ways that I didn't even realize. So we have the music industry, which is ranked the fourth globally in music imports around the world. And you might know of some of these, and I think I have time to play us a couple clips next. There's also television, drama, streaming through the very technology that we now know South Korea helped promote. Huge export value and names we might know: Squid Game, All of Us Are Dead, and the list continues on. I actually have a reference list for you. If you have to leave early, please grab into the chat box and save for yourself the references of South Korea experiences that you might want to try out on your own. There is film. So we know about the Oscar-winning Parasite, perhaps. How about the Avengers? Total audience globally of 123.1 million people. Literature. Until recently, Asians, in particular Asian women, were not well known globally for literary, contemporary literature. But we now have a Nobel laureate, Hong Kong, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2024. And I've included some of her works as references in my handouts as well. There's also Min Jin Lee's Pachinko. We have The Heartless, and the list goes on. So literature from South Korea is now continuing to have a global impact. And then there is Korean food. So we might now be familiar with kimchi and bulgogi and South Korean fried chicken and the Korean barbecue, which manifests not only in setting up South Korean or Korean influenced eateries across the US, but also in the food products that get exported from South Korea. I want to take a pause right now. I'm actually going to stop sharing for just a second. Recording again. So, who was that? This group BTS, which has been renamed Behind the Scenes, is a boy group. It's one of the early ones, one of the more popular ones, but there are dozens of those that we can point to. They represent, which is pretty typical of the K-pop idols music phenomena, which blends vocal and very precise choreography. The individual performers, who are known as idols, are contracted with companies that then provide for their training, which is incredibly strict. So they have to do with diet, activities, manners, training in dance, and there are several organizations that contract and take on their training. And to date, right now, they counted 752 of these idols. And they have a big influence on South Korea's ability and capacity in exporting their beauty products, because they represent the ideal physical physicality of not only the idols, but something we can all aspire to. So the cosmetic industry now in Korea is a $2.6 billion export business with skincare, colors, cleansing products, with a huge rise of over 18% just in the last 4 years. South Korea is now the largest exporter to the US. So we import more South Korean beauty products than we do from any other country in the US, including France now. It has been promoted by the popularity of idols and also is very compatible with a highly profitable cosmetic surgery business for many reasons. The double eyelid look is created surgically. And in 2023, there were 600,000 medical tourists to South Korea. this creates some tension. Some of the skin bleaching is dangerous. Products have not yet adopted standards similar to the US and China. It is a highly under-regulated procedure, and there can be dangerous complications such as scarring or asymmetries. There's also a practice called ghost cosmetic surgeons, where somebody else comes and actually performs the work while you're under than the cosmetic surgeon you thought you were contracting with. This is also incredibly important to the healthcare industry. Well, why would that be? Because this line of medicine is highly profitable, and it's where many of the physicians migrate to from the South Korean medical system. So what are the downsides of K-pop? First of all, idols themselves suffer by having to present this perfectionism, and they often are prohibited from social lives, including dating. The image reinforces a heteronormativity that's been criticized in some sectors. It's also very restrictive and ethnically specific in promoting particular beauty standards, which contribute again to the importance of appearance. Appearance is also important not only for your social life, but also for your job advancement and the status of your family. In South Korea, amongst the South Koreans, they have the highest per capita ratio of plastic surgery in the world at a rate of about 20% compared to 5% in the US. Also, a value for extreme slimness. Slimness adds to eating disorders, and idols report serious mental health crises. It's been largely popularized way of looking that now affects health and wellness on an individual level. So now I get to come back to healthcare. So there is universal health care in South Korea, which seems to be a pretty good thing. National healthcare service is actually something that individuals in South Korea pay into. They have one of the best healthcare systems in the world, according to measurements, one of the highest life expectancies, one of the lowest levels of preventable deaths. Compared in particular to the US, these numbers are significant. Very high rates of outpatient clinic visits at 14.7 per person per year. Physicians as a body are highly respected and on the upper end of the physician scale, bring in high wages as well as their prestige. The industry is advancing globally in its use of biomedical technology and AI technology, which also had a major influence during the COVID-19 response, which was information technology based because they traced individuals at a very high rate and were able to identify those who were contagious that way. It was also highly criticized, another one of the tensions in South Korea. So the response to COVID instability was actually then intervened by the government, who put in a New Deal policy that invested further into healthcare resources as well as green resources. So how does this end up being a healthcare crisis? You might actually know this, but South Korean doctors have been on strike since January of 2024. So who is taking care of the high level of mental illnesses, which are undertreated to begin with, not only in the K-pop industry, but in society? And why would South Korean doctors go on strike? Well, this has to do with the economic system of the national healthcare system. The hospitals, the clinics have a very low reimbursement rate. So there's up to a 60% gap between what they actually receive from individuals and what it costs them to provide these services. How is that made up? Through an increasingly heavy patient load, which falls on the shoulders of junior doctors who are assigned 36-hour shifts and 80 hours per week. Those are the people who went on strike. It's further complicated by a very high malpractice liability that can result in imprisonment. For any violation, there is no legal right to resign as a doctor in South Korea. And as I mentioned before, for those who are excelling within the system, they can then go into private cosmetic operations, which are highly profitable and don't have the same amount of burdens. There is a interesting story about this because Yoon, the president who was just dismissed, became very unpopular when the strike began. And his plan to address the strike problem was to increase physicians in the school system by 200 more physicians per year, about a two-thirds of an increase. And instead of addressing the system to simply put more people into the existing system was going to be the solution. In response to that, 9,000 medical residents and fellows resigned, which right now puts the South Korean healthcare system at a tremendous deficit in having the resources to provide the services that it's committed to provide. One of the ways it's addressing it in the short term is to expand the scope of nurses who now have scope of practice to do many of the duties that doctors were doing before, as well as physician assistants are expanded their practice scope, and to bring in military healthcare workers to try to fill the gap. But everyone pretty much agrees that this is not a good long-term solution. So how are we to look at South Korea going forward? And there are many challenges. Well, immediately, even as an economic power, the fourth largest economic power in Asia, they can experience, they're anticipating a tremendous impact of US tariffs. So right now they are the sixth global exporter to the US. They are the eighth largest global exporter worldwide. There is some talk of them forging stronger trade relationships now with China in order to be able to compensate. And I think we can all just read the current events as they are unfolding to see how that works out. They have to resolve the healthcare crisis, and there is no end in sight for a solution to that. Also, the inequalities that are going on within society and the lower birth rates. They have to take care of in the short term June elections to replace the president because they don't have one right now. And there is also a deepening military cooperation between North Korea and Russia that is definitely on their radar. What strengths do they have going forward? Well, they've got a citizenry that is committed to democracy, as evidenced by the many protests and movements that have taken them to their place in the world today. They have resilience, as shown by decades of struggle against authoritarian leaders and systems, and bipartisan cooperation, which is even shown in the recent dismissal of President Yoon, because both parties came together to accomplish this move forward. The innovation capacity has a basis in the strong education system, although I will mention again that they have an education system that is more geared towards skill development than imaginary thinking. So we'll see how that works out in the next generation. They've got connectivity through the 5G network. They had a strong exchange of culture, which promotes an exchange of ideas, and a diversified export, including the entertainment products, and it's not clear yet how those will be tariffed. So we've got an increasing economy, decreasing inflation, and a tremendous amount of uncertainty. Bottom line, we have some lessons that we can learn there. Ah, but before I go on, I want to mention that all of us have the ability to experience firsthand. So you can visit a Korean cultural center, find an exhibit of Korean art, find a Koreatown near you. And again, I want to thank my daughter for introducing me to K-Town in New York to see the foods and the products firsthand. You'll find those in other cities across the US, and all of these are listed on the handout that I provided for you. You can visit a Korean temple, spend a day at a Korean spa, listen to spoken Korean. You can consume the culture through music, dance. It is only a finger click away, along with film, TV, cuisine, skincare, beauty, wellness, and the literature, which I highly recommend. So in summary, I thank you all for listening. Um, this presentation represents my personal experience exploring innovation in the social sectors of South Korea and witnessing through what's documented how their innovation propelled progress through innovation and also created tensions that ripple through all of their society and also exposed the fundamental role of governance in driving their economic development and their influence. And for me, and I hope for you, generated interest in experiencing Korean culture. So at this point, I am going to entertain any questions, comments, or discussions that may have come up, and I will stop sharing. Should we pause the recording too?
And we can keep the recording going, just in case there are any questions that
Okay, good.
everybody might have.
So, do we have any questions in the chat box?
We do not at this point yet. So everybody, if you if you have any questions at all for Dr. Fortune, comments, anything like that, please feel free to unmute yourself or pop it into the chat box, raise your hand. Let us know if you have any questions.
Well, I probably wouldn't have rushed through as much as I did. So, oh, thank you, Edward. Political trends. Uh, Let's see. The question from Edward, are any political trends toward increasing the quality of life? Well, I think that we step back. Thank you for the question. Thank you for being here today. I think the interesting part of that question is how we define quality of life, which is, one of the deeper questions here. I think that many of the leaders of South Korea would say they have an excellent quality of life because they've got one of the highest income rates per person anywhere in the world. Yeah, there's a pesky little problem about high suicide rate and high dissatisfaction or low satisfaction with life. I think that right now, all eyes in Korea are focusing on the economic impact that is shaking up the world globally. So any of you who are more geared toward this question or have thoughts on this, please feel free to unmute yourselves and join in the conversation. And Ed, if you want to unmute yourself too and ask follow-up questions, please do. Any thoughts on that from the rest of the group? So Tanya, we might be out of questions here.
I think so. So I would like to extend a very, very heartfelt thank you to you, Dr. Fortune, for this amazing presentation. As you all know, this is being recorded and you will all receive a link to the recording. You can always visit our YouTube channel as well to see all of our Globe Talks. And we hope you enjoyed this presentation and we hope to see you in one of our future Globe Talks. Keep an eye out for those emails. Thank you all so much. Bye.
Thanks, and feel free to contact me with any questions. I'm at lfortune@saybrook.edu.